Without further ado, I'm going to introduce my panelists. Nick, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm Nick Nugian, head of engineering at Doppler. I've been here going on 4 years, 3.5 or so. So it's been a wild ride, lots of changes to the process, a lot of learnings along the way. So excited to share with you what we've learned.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Lainey?
Hello, everybody. I'm Lainey. I'm the head of design at Doppler. I've been here for almost 2 years now. And previously, I worked as a product designer at orgs that were really large, in-house teams, small agencies, startups, freelance work. So also have a wide array of process experience. So excited to talk about what we've done at Doppler today.
Awesome. Thank you, Lainey. James?
Hey, everybody. Great to be here. I'm James Heimbach, the product manager at Doppler. I've been here just about 10 and a half months, I think. And yeah, similar to Lainey, mixed background of big companies, small companies, agencies, private companies, public companies. So lots of varied experience. So it's been really fun to bring that lens to the Doppler process and some of my learnings and figure out what works best for us to deliver quality products.
Awesome. Thank you, James. Yeah, and as you can see, we have some super smart people here today on the webinar. Some of my favorite people that I work with. So this is going to be a great session. So let's just jump right into it. So first of all, what is this? How did we get to this point? What was wrong with our backlog process? Nick, could you get us started?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I mentioned, we've been through a bunch of different iterations on this. In the early days of Doppler, it was 3 engineers, 4 engineers. So we were mostly just hacking on whatever we thought needed doing. We also had some folks on the East Coast, some folks on the West. So, I would wake up on the East Coast and, 3 hours of work had been done on something already. And I was like, oh, I actually, had some ideas for how that could work. And, maybe we should have aligned on that better, or, was that really the best thing for us to be working on? And, we got things done very quickly, but we were lacking focus. So as all organizations mature, there starts to be a need to at least project what you're going to work on. You start building out a roadmap of, okay, here are the highest value items that we can be working on, the best features. And you at least build out like broad strokes what we think we're going to be working on. So as we started growing our team, the first thing that we tried was, your classical like agile style sprints. We would just kind of like load up each cycle, in linear, which is a tool that we've, I think, used since the very beginning. And we would load that up and execute on it. And that worked out okay, although it seemed like we were always failing our sprints, which is kind of a demoralizing thing, right? You line up all this stuff, then things change. Okay, well, do you cancel the sprint and start a new one? Do you
What
like
does that
swap
mean,
things
though? What
out?
does it mean to fail a sprint?
It's kind of like an agile term. I think in like very strict agile, you're not supposed to take anything out of the sprint. So if you don't complete everything in the sprint, you fail it, right? You don't meet all of you didn't do all the things you set out to do. And like, month after month or week after week, if you're not hitting the goal, it's demoralizing to say, okay, well, we didn't do everything we set out to do. And like, maybe that's okay. Maybe like, our objectives changed, or maybe this took longer than we were anticipating. And like, it's not necessarily a failure of the team, it's a failure of the process. So we said, let's throw all that away. Let's go back to something a little bit more focused on the objectives. And we started doing like broader roadmap strategic planning. So, okay, here's all the things that we want to do, and we'll just assign it to engineers, right? We'll like just say, hey, Nick, you're working on this, Andre, you're working on this, and just hand out these items to individual folks. And that worked okay. But what about all the little things, right? Like a feature request crops up or a bug. Like, how do you distribute these things? How do you assign them to the team? How do you get visibility on what's going on? And we just said, you know what? What's a better way to do this? That's kind of how we ended up with the need to try something new.
Okay. And so who are the stakeholders designing this roadmap?
I think early days, when we started addressing a problem, it was pretty democratic, and then we started realizing that there were like a few key players that were asking for engineering to build things. Right? There's like a certain number of things that come internal from engineering. There's bugs to fix. There's performance improvements. There's cleanup. There's like things that keep the lights on. And then we had like obvious product things, right? Things that we wanted to do to build the product, make it better, new features, improvements to existing features, and like small quality of life things would also fit into like the product purview, I guess. And then Lainey joined, and all of a sudden we had all these excellent UX features that were arriving, and her team was saying, "Hey, doesn't look great, or this is kind of inconsistent with the rest of the product. Could we, could we allocate some time to improving this?" And we're like, "Well, that's not really James's domain, right? That's not really like a James thing. That's a Lainey thing. That's a design initiative. Like her team deserves some bandwidth, and how do we allocate that? How do we assign that to people? How do we get that work done?"
Okay, makes sense. Lainey, James, before I move on to the next part of this, did you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that design side of things. Kind of before we started getting into this process and iterating on how we do things now, like Nick said, the focus was kind of scattered. I think from a design perspective, we kind of just had a to-do list. There was really no initiative that we were able to take for things that might not necessarily fall under the product bucket or the growth bucket or engineering. There's things that will improve the developer experience that might not directly affect ROI, but will affect the actual happiness of our users. So our UX debt, of course, was growing. And an example of something that we weren't able to prioritize without this system is this React migration. So when I joined, I had grand plans for even just updating one hex value in the product. And because of this mid-migration place that we were in, we couldn't make any of these adjustments. So if we had this process sooner, then we could have probably prioritized the React migration as like a design stakeholder item, even though it's not going to directly affect ROI immediately. In the long term, it's going to help design, and then it's going to help in turn engineering, product growth, everything outside of that. So kind of went from this, why are we working on things, but here's our to-do list and we're moving really quickly, like Nick said. So it looked great and it felt good because we were really rapid, but then it was like, I think there's some design improvements that are kind of being left behind, and this UX debt is continuing to grow exponentially without re-looking at this process. So that's the design side, I think, of this like pre-process that we have now.
Thank you for providing some examples. James, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was really lucky to come in, and most of this process was already set. And so, as a product person, I like to make sure we're leaving some bandwidth for tech debt, whether that's bugs or nits from the engineering team and the design team. I think where I brought some focus and worked with the other stakeholders was ensuring that those things align to a bigger roadmap not the bigger roadmap, but the business objectives that we had. And that's an area for us still to continue to work on and refine, is that what tech debt can we eliminate now that sets us up for better success in the future as we think about the business objectives. Where do we want to improve the product? What's the right next area of the design to focus on and the components to build so that we can do that quicker in turn. And so it was really great to come in and see, oh, there's already a design stakeholder and an engineering stakeholder. It's not just the product show of what's on the roadmap. And be able to bring to that, as stakeholders, we always think about not just what we want to build, but why we want to build it. And so helping the other stakeholders with that and bringing that into the issues that they're putting into the backlog and prioritizing provides context for the engineers so they feel like they're connected to the business outcomes that we're trying to drive.
Okay, makes sense. We've got a couple new attendees that are joining. Just to recap, we were covering most of our pain points with our previous backlog process, trying to balance the needs with various stakeholders and the issues that arose from that. So moving on from there, how is our new process different? What things did we address to change first? I'll leave this open for any of my panelists to respond.
I'll hop in here with kind of how we started on it. We knew we wanted something that was transparent. So we identified stakeholders. These are people that, or more like teams, right, or focus groups that need engineering bandwidth. They need things to get done. They need things to get built. That's engineering itself. That's design, core product, and growth. And we sort of have some flex bandwidth available for our data engineering team because they sometimes need like more infrastructure built out to be able to collect data and serve the other teams. So we identified these folks who need to get things done, right? They need allocation, they need bandwidth from engineering to be able to build things. And we had the immediate goal of like providing transparency and agency to those stakeholders. If a stakeholder says, I want this done, there needs to be a mechanism for them to be able to put forward a thing and get it done. We also wanted the ability for stakeholders to be able to make tweaks and change that, right? If they say, hey, I want this done, and they decide later on, like, actually, you know, I want to swap that out for something else. They should have the flexibility to do that. This is a startup. We need to be able to move quickly and adjust as the needs of the business change. We also have a very senior engineering organization. A lot of the folks here are very experienced. They can operate very independently, and they each come from different backgrounds. They've got different experience, different interests, and that, you know, like any organization, folks have different time constraints. Some people are working late or early. Some folks are on, you know, on leave, and you know, or they've only going to be here for, you know, a little bit of a particular week. So we wanted something that was flexible for engineers and it was flexible for stakeholders. We also were trying to optimize the like velocity of the team with sort of a broader idea called like maximum sustainable velocity. And this is the idea that like the engine should be able to keep running at its current speed indefinitely. Like, how do we get the most out of it where engineers feel empowered, they're working hard, they're feeling energized, but not to the point where it couldn't go on forever, right? And like maintaining that optimal RPM for our engineering engine, so to speak, was the core goal. And then we had a couple of anti-goals. For a period of time, engineering was like the gatekeeper of the backlog, the arbiter, right? So if handed two items, we were the ones who were deciding which of these is more important. That's really something to avoid. Engineering organizations generally are bad at that, unless they are already deeply involved in the business, like exactly what James said, providing a broader context. Why are we working on this over this? How does this drive the business forward? We're also specifically trying to avoid imposing artificial deadlines. And we were trying to and we're trying to avoid locking stakeholders into defining priorities on a cadence. So again, that's sort of the opposite of flexibility. We want to give that flexibility. So what we settled on is something that we called, well, it's gone by a couple different names. I think the most popular name right now is bandwidth allocated Kanban. Kanban is, you know, a very process light strategy where there's like a queue of items, right? And engineers should be grabbing from the highest priority list. So we made a little bit of an adjustment on that. And the overall strategy works like this. All the stakeholders sit down on a cadence. I think these days we're doing it weekly just to check in. But it's very process light. And we all come forward with our initiatives, right? There are projects that engineering wants to work on. There are projects the product wants to work on. We all have things that we think are important. And we come up with allocations. So we sit down and say, what does the business need right now? Does it need more feature development? Do we need to be overhauling our UX? Do we need to make improvements to our system performance? What does the business need? And we come up with a percentage allocation and say, okay, we're going to put 60% of our effort on product, 20% on design, and so forth, and really carve out what the business needs. The stakeholders are also not fixed. Like, if, you know, we've got a stakeholder for growth work, if that becomes more or less important, we can shift the priority or add brand new stakeholders depending on the needs of the business. The most important thing is that a stakeholder should be able to select work to do and advocate for that work, and try to make an argument on why their work is more important than, or it deserves a seat at the table, I should say. So we do this budgeting on like I said, we probably only do the budgeting. We check in on it every week, but really it only happens like monthly that we need to actually look at this. And that informs the mix of work. So each stakeholder ends up with a certain amount of allocation and as a score, you know, out of 100. The other half of this is sort of a traditional agile style of estimation. So at any point, a stakeholder can hand an item over to engineering and say, hey, how much does this cost? And this, you know, it's definitely more art than science, I think. There's lots of good literature on how to estimate things. We do like a Fibonacci style. We've talked about switching to something more exponential, but the idea should be that it should be basically free for engineering to be able to take a well-defined item or a group of items in the case of like a project, and break that out into estimates, right? So this is a small, a medium. So it's super quick for us to say, if James hands us an item, hey, how much does this cost? We say, yeah, it's a medium. Throw it right back to you. Now James has a big pool of all the work that he wants to do, and it's all estimated, and he's got points. So we decide on a re-up allocation, like 100 points or 200 points or whatever it is. And James gets his allocation, Laney gets hers, and so on. And we sit down and say, okay, here are all the work items that we want to do. And that fills up what we have as our active body of work. The engineers can grab anything from that body of work. And this is a really powerful part of the system because it gives lots of flexibility to engineers. I want to work on something big today. I want to work on something small. I want to jam out it's a Friday afternoon. I don't want to start on a big thing. I just want to do a little cleanup task. Engineers have a whole pool of work to select from. And there's like parameters that you can tune on that. If you have a bigger pool of work, it's less predictable. If you have a smaller pool, then engineers have less flexibility. But at its core, this is what we landed on. I've been talking for a very long time, so I want to let Laney and James hop in with any feedback points at this stage.
Yeah, actually, I want to ask Laney and James a bit more about from their side of this process. And thank you for explaining that in depth, Nick. I'm going to drop the blog post in the chat if anybody wants to go into that and learn a little bit more. The blog post is there. Laney, I'll let you go first. What from this process hasn't worked and what has worked from your perspective?
Yeah, so whenever we first started shifting toward this process, design did not have an allocation. I think we went on, I think it was maybe just 3 weeks or so before our next EPD call came, and I was realizing we're stalling on any sort of UX work. I don't really know how I'm going to have to either convince James to give me points in his bucket or Growth to give me points in their bucket or Eng. So kind of coming to this conclusion as a team that design is essentially the foundation for a lot of things that others in this group need. So we also would love to have this allocation and allow us to reduce this UX debt. Because as much as we reduce the UX debt, that means that we can design that much faster for everybody else. Obviously, our business goals right now are going to be supporting things for ROI and whatever is happening at Doppler at the time. But we're unique because we don't allow for third-party tracking tools. So it's kind of hard to tie the ROI to design. I know I've said that a few times, but our biggest bet is helping the rest of the team. But again, on top of that, we need to be able to have time to work on the foundations like our library of components and updating things throughout the entire product in order to make us faster in Figma and look better in the product. So it was a very easy decision. I think everybody was in agreement that design should be part of the pie, which was really great. And I feel pretty rare, especially at a startup. But again, Doppler really cares about the developer experience. So it gives us an opportunity to fight for those points, even though it's pretty easy to get them. Everybody agrees. And yeah, I think I'm glad that we've landed where we have. Obviously, our allocation changes from time to time depending on what the business goals are, but that's also the best part of this process is we all know what the business goals are and we know why we're working on everything. So I have no problem either asking for more points or giving up points to whoever needs them, depending on what we're actually trying to focus on. So that's been the design side of things without letting other design stuff stall while also working on other priorities for everybody else.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning our team alignment. One question I've gotten about that blog post several times is how it can be applied to your team or to different size teams. And really, that's a hard question to answer because we developed this process around our team. And one thing that's nice about our team is we're all very much aligned in our goals. So this process might not work for you, or it might work well with some changes. Anyway, James, would love to hear from the product side. What do you think?
Yeah, I think kind of building on that alignment of goals, we think about goals quarterly as far as like as a business objective, here's what we want to do. And then kind of here are some of the things that if we execute on them well and drive these metrics, we think we're going to get to that objective. It's kind of an OKR style of goals and objectives. And that helps the three of us align as stakeholders of what do we need to do for the business? What do we think we need to do from a feature enhancement or feature new feature perspective. So we can get aligned on what we need to go build. And then definitely one of the things that we've learned over the process and that I've learned in my time being here is, especially with a security product, is there's a lot of edge cases and getting into those early in the process and having all three stakeholders part of that process is super important. It helps us when we get to that, I'm dropping a body of work into the bucket, that engineers don't have to rehash all of that with us again. We've answered a lot of those questions, and it feels like it takes a lot of time up front and a lot of investment, and you're spending all this time talking and writing. But when it gets to the execution part of things, it goes so much faster because that context is there for the person who's actually building it. They understand the use cases, they understand the existing pain points, they see that we've thought through how this is going to work in the product. And another really important part that is kind of specific to Doppler, but I've seen work elsewhere, is we're building this new feature. What else is it going to touch in our product? If we're changing this part of the Doppler dashboard, what needs to happen in our CLI tool? What do we need to think about for a Terraform provider? What do we need to think about for our IDE plugins? Because all of those things need to continue to work to have a great kind of first-class developer experience. And maybe we don't build them right from the outset, but that gives us a nice roadmap for that feature of, first we're going to solve this problem and it's going to be solved here, and then we're going to go tick off these other boxes and help drive great experience and unified experience for the customer.
Awesome. Thank you, James. Let's talk a little bit more about buckets and what the buckets mean to us and how we size them and how we are prioritizing the tickets. Nick, could you take this one?
Certainly. Yeah. The bucket size is, as I mentioned, kind of a parameter you can tune. It's not super important, but it's sort of like the active body of work that you're committing to that you want to get done right now. So we do, arbitrarily like 100 points of work in a particular bucket. And what we did, which I'd recommend for anyone who wants to try this, is like choose an arbitrary number, see how long it takes for your team to finish that, and then adjust as necessary. So, if you want the whole bucket to get cleared in 1 month, adjust your sizes accordingly, right? However, whatever your estimations and your velocity, however that works, adjust it to match your cycle. So the advantage of a bigger bucket is that your engineers can grab any of that work, and you get pretty good efficiency on that, because, and this is something that was really eye-opening for me. There are just like some of the work items are just chores, right? Like there's engineering work that has to get done, that just has to get done. There's cleanups and performance investigations. And it was funny chatting with folks, and I was like, hey, is there any way that you could scoop this item up or this item up, if it gets stuck, are you worried about having to do this if it's the last thing in the bucket? And people were like, no, I'm actually really excited about that. I wanted to claim that one. And then other people being like, oh gosh, I really hope I don't hit that, and that would be awful. So like, if you hire, a team that has a diversity of interests, you end up having, it's easy to execute on everything. If your bucket is too small, then it's hard to find a person that wants to work on that thing. But things get done, the whole bucket will get cleared quickly, because what can happen is, things might get stuck at the bottom. If the bucket's way too big, then, the stakeholder doesn't really know when things are going to get done, because engineers can choose whatever item they want. And, your item might be the last in the bucket. So that means that your item could be done anytime between, today and the end of the month. If that works for your org, that meets your needs, then that's fine. If you need more visibility than that, you might want to narrow your bucket. What is interesting from a like a prioritization perspective is having stakeholders, like well-defined stakeholders, ownership there. If someone, submits a feature request or wants something changed in the product, right? It ends up in my inbox as the engineering, triager. And I'm looking at it going, who owns this? Right? If it's a bug, then it should be engineering. If it's product, then it should go to James and his team. And I'm looking at it going like, who owns this? And if I can't find a stakeholder who wants to advocate for it, we probably should not do it. Or there's a missing stakeholder, right? That maybe there's a missing advocate who should be talking about the data objectives, for example. And that's been really useful. It's like, who will claim this? Who will find allocation for it? So as far as like the prioritization goes, that happens on a per stakeholder level. Stakeholders are responsible for deciding among their goals and objectives which things are most important. And then the bucket isn't fixed, which is also important. You can always swap out your items for other items if you decide that you want to do that.
James, did you have anything you wanted to comment on there?
Yeah, I will say when I joined and Nick and I first started talking about the process and it was Kanban, I got really nervous about those like little bugs and UX things and even small product things. It's like, oh, I've been there, done that. They just linger on the bottom because there's always something that's a bigger priority. But once I understood kind of the, hey, we have a bucket and we go until it's empty process that Doppler had in place, it ensures that, hey, all of that stuff is going to get done. So that, and you still as a stakeholder have that flexibility to say, hey, this is really super important. I need to drop things right now and prioritize this. And it's great to have, really understanding coworkers who is part of the trio. You can have that conversation of, I need to swap this thing in. It's super important it's a customer bug. They're blocked. They're running into an issue that we need to get resolved really, really quickly. How can we accommodate this? What do we need to take out of the current work and accommodate for it? And I did want to mention one thing that we've learned in the last couple of months that it can be super important to tune is the size of things that you're putting in. And this can ebb and flow just like everything else in this process. But what we ran into was I got greedy and took a lot of the allocation and dropped some really big projects into the bucket. And that did, for a portion of time, kind of starve the other stakeholders because all of our engineers picked up these super interesting, meaty things and then worked on them and only them for a while, which was an unintended consequence of that. I mean, we got great features out of it, but we did starve some of our other stakeholders of their work not getting done for a while, which was not a consequence that we had thought about. So now we have that discussion as we're filling the bucket of how many big rocks do we want to put in there so that we have space for those other little things and have that good mix of work to really get done.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can
Yeah,
I
Lainey,
add
I'd
on
love to
to that a
hear.
little bit? Yeah, I think to James's point, whenever he's talking about kind of taking over the bucket, I think what made that okay is that everyone knew why we were doing it. Nobody was questioning, well, why are there more points being allocated here? Like we all understand the business goal and what we were aiming for and got a really exciting feature out of it. So I think the flexibility of being able to do that and then having the understanding among EPD, like I'm good to give up some points here because this is a really important feature. Like UX debt can be put on pause for a little bit. I'll still get some points, but that's totally fine pushing it that way. So I think that flexibility is great. Obviously not an all the time type of thing, but I think we're so much more defined on why we're doing things now that it's much easier to understand the allocation that we want to give everybody. And then the things not being left behind. I think that the points of our total bucket, we've experimented with 50, with 100. I think we're trying 75. I think being able to change that around and see like what the velocity of work getting out changes to and our design things still being left at the bottom or something that's like really annoying and nobody wants to work on. Obviously it will have to get done before we re-up the bucket because we go till it's zero, but still trying to get that cadence right, I think is where we're adjusting and we're all flexible as a team on what that should be and what that could mean. And one last point to Nick's point about stakeholders. So putting things in triage for Nick to look at, for example, and make sure that there's a stakeholder assigned to whatever ticket that is. I think it's really great because we have engineers that will create design stakeholder tickets where they've noticed something. Like, I think this is worth putting a ticket in. They'll assign it to as a design stakeholder. We'll take a look and be like, wow, thank you so much for catching that. That's amazing. Yes, we will put this in the body of work that we want to put forward for that allocation. So I think having that flexibility and everybody's collaborative, everyone's always looking out for everywhere that could be improved, whether it's your stakeholder or not, is also really great as a team.
Awesome. Thank you, Lainey. Uh, just about out of time. It doesn't look like we have any questions. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I want to thank my panelists again for your time today and your very thoughtful answers to my questions. And I want to thank our attendees. Thank you for attending and watching this session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Chandler. Bye, y'all.